Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, The Consequences of Building a Driveway Without Permission. I had lived in the same neighborhood for years, and I thought I knew all of my neighbors pretty well. However, one day, I heard a story that I just couldn't believe. A few doors down the road, there was an old couple who had lived in their house for as long as I could remember. They were kind and always had a smile on their faces, so it was a surprise when they started to get upset about something. It turns out that a new neighbor had bought the vacant lot next door to them, and they had started to build a new house on the steep hillside. This wasn't unusual in our neighborhood, but what was unusual was that the new neighbor had built their driveway partly on the old couple's property, without asking for permission. The old couple didn't know what to do. They had no idea what the legal ramifications were, and they were worried about what would happen if they took legal action against their new neighbor. They also didn't want to cause any trouble, but they knew that they couldn't just let someone walk all over them. The situation only got worse when they went to talk to the new neighbor. He was rude and dismissive, denying that the driveway crossed the property line. The old couple was understandably upset, but they didn't want to cause a scene. They tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't budge. Days turned into weeks, and construction on the new house continued. The old couple watched in dismay as the excavator dug into their property, carving out the hillside to make way for the new driveway. They knew that they had to do something, but they just didn't know what. One day, the old couple's son came to visit them. He was a friend of a neighbor I knew, and he told us about what was happening. We were all outraged by the new neighbor's behavior, and we knew that we had to help the old couple. One neighbor had a friend who was a property lawyer, so we asked her to look into the matter. It turned out that the new neighbor had indeed built his driveway on the old couple's property, and they had a legal right to demand that he remove it. The old couple didn't want to take legal action, but they knew that they had to do something to protect their property. They tried to reason with the new neighbor again, but he was still uncooperative. That's when my neighbor had an idea. He had an old pickup truck that he didn't use much anymore, and he decided to park it across the driveway, entirely on the old couple's property. The next day, when the construction crew arrived, they found that they couldn't get to the house they were building because the truck was blocking the way. The new neighbor was furious. He demanded that the truck be moved, but my neighbor stood his ground. He had permission from the owners to park there, and he wasn't going to move the truck until the property boundary dispute was resolved. The construction crew had no choice but to take the day off, and the new neighbor was left fuming. However, he eventually realized that he needed to resolve the issue if he wanted his house to be built. He ended up paying a significant sum of money to the old couple in exchange for an easement allowing the driveway to pass across the corner of their property. The old couple was grateful for the help, but they were also sad that they had to resort to such measures to protect their property. They felt like they had been wronged, and they didn't want to see anyone else go through the same thing. That's when they decided to take action. They started a neighborhood watch group, encouraging everyone to look out for each other and to report any suspicious activity. They also organized a community meeting to discuss the issue of property boundaries and the importance of respecting one another's property. At the meeting, the property lawyer who had helped the old couple gave a presentation on property law and the legal options available to homeowners. She emphasized the importance of knowing your property lines and understanding your rights as a property owner. The meeting was a success, and it brought the neighborhood together in a way that it hadn't been before. People started to look out for each other more, and there was a sense of community that hadn't existed before. As for the new neighbor, he eventually finished building his house and moved in. However, he was never fully accepted by the neighborhood. People would be polite to him, but they would also keep their distance. One day, a few months after the incident with the driveway, there was a fire in the new neighbor's house. It started in the garage and quickly spread to the rest of the house. The fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was already done. The house was a total loss. At first, people assumed it was just a tragic accident, but rumors started to circulate that the fire had been set deliberately. Some people whispered that the old couple had done it as revenge for the driveway incident. No one knows for sure what happened, but the fire was a wake-up call for the neighborhood. It reminded us all of the importance of being good neighbors and treating each other with respect. As for the old couple, they were heartbroken by the fire. They knew that they had nothing to do with it, but they still felt guilty. They had never wanted things to escalate to that point, and they wished that they could have found a peaceful solution. The community rallied around them, though, and helped them rebuild their house. People brought over food and offered to help with the repairs. The old couple was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, and they realized that they truly were a part of a caring and compassionate neighborhood. Update. It's been a few years since the incident with the driveway and the fire, and the neighborhood has changed a lot. The old couple has since passed away, but their legacy lives on. The community is still close-knit, and people still look out for each other. The new neighbor who had built his driveway without permission ended up moving away a few years ago. He never really fit in with the community, and he always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. Some people think that he was never able to shake the feeling that someone was out to get him. As for me, I'm grateful to live in such a wonderful neighborhood. The incident with the driveway and the fire was a difficult time for all of us, but it also brought us closer together. We learned that when we work together, we can overcome any obstacle, and that's a lesson that I'll never forget. In my opinion, this was a great story about the importance of being a good neighbor and respecting each other's property. The old couple in the story were kind and reasonable, and it's a shame that they had to go through such a stressful situation. It's heartening to see how the community came together to support them and to work towards a peaceful resolution. The dramatic ending was a surprise, but it reminded me of how important it is to treat people with respect and kindness. Overall, I thought this was a well-written and engaging story that had a valuable message. The next story is titled HOA Neighbor Stole My Paid Parking Spot and Got Me Towed from My Own Property. My name is Rachel, and I live in an HOA neighborhood that's usually pretty peaceful. We don't have driveways, so we all park in the street or in private parking spots that we can purchase. I had one of these spots, which was incredibly convenient for me, but I never imagined it would cause so much trouble. It all started when my new neighbor, Matt, moved in next door. He seemed friendly enough at first, but I soon realized that he was very entitled and thought he could do whatever he wanted. One day I came home from work to find his car parked in my spot. I knocked on his door, and he told me that he had spoken to the HOA president, who had given him permission to park there. I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I let it go for the night. The next day I woke up early to move my car into the spot before heading off to work. When I returned home, I saw Matt fuming outside his house, but I ignored him and went inside. That's when things started to get really crazy. A few days later, I woke up to find my car missing. I called the police, and they informed me that it had been towed due to reports of an abandoned vehicle. When I went to pick it up, I found out that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I knew immediately that Matt was behind it, but I didn't have any proof. I tried talking to him, but he just laughed and told me to get over it. I felt helpless and frustrated, and I didn't know what to do. But then something unexpected happened. One day I received a letter from the HOA that informed me that my parking spot had been sold to someone else. I couldn't believe it. I had paid for that spot, and now someone else had taken it without my consent. I contacted the HOA, but they were no help. They told me that there had been a mistake and that they couldn't do anything to help me. I was livid. I felt like I was being taken advantage of, and I didn't know what to do. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started doing some research and found out that Matt had a history of being a difficult neighbor. He had caused problems in his previous neighborhood, and I found a lot of negative reviews about him online. I decided to gather as much evidence as I could and bring it to the HOA. I spent weeks compiling information and putting together a case against Matt. Finally, I had enough evidence to prove that he was a problem neighbor, and I brought it to the HOA. To my surprise, they actually listened to me. They reviewed the evidence and decided to take action against Matt. They fined him for his behavior and made him apologize to me. I felt like justice had been served, but I didn't want to let my guard down. I knew that Matt was still capable of causing trouble, so I kept a close eye on him. And then, something even more unexpected happened. One day, I came home to find my car missing again. I immediately called the police, and they informed me that it had been stolen. I couldn't believe it. Not only had someone taken my parking spot, but now they had taken my car too. I was devastated. I felt like I was being targeted, and I didn't know who to trust. But then, something incredible happened. A few days later, the police called me to let me know that they had found my car. I rushed to the impound lot to retrieve my car, and to my surprise, it was in perfect condition. The police told me that they had found it parked in a different neighborhood, and that the person who had taken it had abandoned it and fled on foot. I couldn't believe my luck. It was as if the universe had finally decided to give me a break. I felt like I had finally gotten my life back on track, and I was grateful for the support of the police and the HOA, but even though things were finally looking up, I still had some concerns. I knew that Matt was still out there, and I didn't trust him. I decided to invest in a security system for my home and car just to be safe. For a while, things were quiet. I went about my business, focusing on my job and my hobbies. But then one day I came home to find a note on my front door. It was from Matt, and it was a thinly veiled threat. He told me that he knew where I parked my car and that he would make sure I regretted messing with him. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I called the police, but they told me that there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. I felt like I was back at square one. But then, I had an idea. I decided to confront Matt directly, to see if I could get him to back off. I waited until I saw him outside, and then I approached him. We had a heated argument, and I could see that he was getting angrier by the minute. But then, something unexpected happened. One of my other neighbors who had been watching from their window came outside to see what was going on. They saw that I was in trouble, and they decided to step in. They called the police, and when Matt realized that he was outnumbered, he fled the scene. From that day on, I knew that I had a true friend in my neighbor. They had my back, and they were willing to stand up to bullies like Matt. As for Matt himself, he eventually moved away. I don't know where he went or what he's doing now, but I'm just glad that he's not causing trouble in my neighborhood anymore. Overall, this experience taught me a lot about the importance of standing up for yourself and seeking help when you need it. It also taught me the value of having good neighbors who are willing to support you when things get tough. I'm grateful for the lessons I learned, and I'm hopeful that my neighborhood will continue to be a peaceful and welcoming place for years to come. In my opinion, this story is a perfect example of how small disagreements between neighbors can escalate quickly and become serious issues. It's interesting to see how one person's entitled behavior can cause so much trouble and affect so many people. It's also heartening to see how the protagonist of the story was able to stand up for herself and ultimately get justice. The story serves as a reminder to always be respectful of others and to try to work out conflicts in a peaceful and mature manner. The next story is titled, "Apparently Booking a Seat on a Train is Not a Real Booking If Someone Else Decides to Sit There." After wrapping up an intense business trip in Edinburgh, I was looking forward to returning to my family in London. Knowing that I'd have a 6-hour train journey ahead of me, I made sure to book a window seat with a table so that I could both enjoy the picturesque scenery and catch up on some work. On the day of my journey, I arrived at the bustling Edinburgh Waverley train station with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Navigating through the crowd, I eventually boarded the train and went straight to my assigned seat, only to find a group of 4 guys occupying the table. They seemed to be friends, enjoying a lively conversation, with one of them sitting in my reserved seat. The booking indicator above the seat clearly displayed my reservation. Feeling a bit flustered, I tried to remain polite as I approached the group. "Excuse me," I said, "but I believe you're in my reserved seat." The guy in my seat glanced at me dismissively and replied, "Sorry, mate, but I'm with my friends, and we don't want to split up. The train is packed. You'll have to find another seat." Frustrated, but still determined, I decided to seek assistance from a ticket collector. It took some time for him to make his way through the crowded train, but when he finally arrived, I explained my situation. He asked the guy to move, but the stubborn passenger simply shook his head and repeated his earlier refusal. The ticket collector sighed and said, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but I have no authority to force him out of the seat. Only the police can do that, and they won't come just to remove someone from a seat." "So what now?" I inquired, my patience wearing thin. "You can try to find another seat, but as you can see, the train is quite full," he replied with a helpless shrug. I glanced around the carriage, seeing no available seats, and felt a growing sense of indignation. That's when I noticed the first-class carriage just a few doors down and hatched a bold plan. "I'm going to take a seat in first class," I declared, my voice resolute. "I'll enjoy better surroundings, power sockets, and complimentary refreshments." "You can't sit there, you don't have a booking," the ticket collector protested. "Well, you could call the police to move me, but apparently they won't turn out to move someone out of a seat," I retorted, a daring glint in my eye. Ignoring the ticket collector's disapproving frown, I confidently strode into the first-class carriage and spotted an unoccupied seat. I settled in, relishing the wide, plush seat and the attentive service from the staff. As I sipped my complimentary coffee and began to work on my laptop, I couldn't help but feel a small thrill at my act of defiance. About an hour into the journey, the ticket collector reappeared, accompanied by 2 police officers. My heart raced, but I maintained my composure as the officers approached me. To my surprise, they didn't ask me to leave. Instead, they informed me that they had successfully convinced the guy in my original seat to move. "Apparently, one officer said with a grin. Booking a seat on a train is not a real booking if someone else decides to sit there. With a sheepish smile, I thanked the officers and returned to my original seat. To my delight, the first-class staff even allowed me to keep my complimentary tea and coffee as a gesture of goodwill. The remainder of my journey went smoothly, and I enjoyed the familiar views of the English countryside as the train made its way towards London. I couldn't help but reflect on the day's events, amused by the unexpected turn my train journey had taken. Back in my original seat, I continued working on my laptop, occasionally stealing glances at the group of guys. They seemed to be unfazed by the whole incident, but I noticed that they now spoke in hushed tones, perhaps a little humbled by the outcome. As the train pulled into London's King's Cross station, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Not only had I successfully reclaimed my rightful seat, but I had also managed to make a small stand against what I considered an unfair situation. Gathering my belongings, I stepped off the train and made my way through the bustling station, eager to reunite with my family. My train journey had been far from ordinary, but it had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes a little daring and determination can go a long way in making things right. In the end, I got my reserved seat back, and as a small act of defiance, the first-class staff allowed me to keep my complimentary tea and coffee. It was a thrilling and dramatic turn of events, but it made for one of the most memorable train journeys of my life. And with every retelling of the story, my family and friends couldn't help but share in the excitement and amusement of my daring adventure on the train from Edinburgh to London. In my opinion, this story was a fun and engaging read. I found myself rooting for the protagonist as they stood up for their rights, and I enjoyed the little twist when the police officers showed up. It's a great reminder that sometimes it takes a bit of courage and quick thinking to navigate through life's unexpected challenges. I couldn't help but chuckle at the final outcome, and it just goes to show that even in seemingly mundane situations like a train journey, there's always room for a bit of excitement and adventure. The last story is titled, "She Tried to Stab Me Ever Since I Can Remember." I've been someone who believed in the importance of compassion and understanding. Growing up in a tight-knit community, I witnessed firsthand the power of support and the transformative impact it could have on people's lives. After working for years as a mental health advocate, I developed a strong conviction that empathy and assistance could help even the most troubled souls find their way. I never imagined that this belief would be tested so severely, nor that it would lead to an experience that would forever change my life. A few weeks ago, I received a call from an old college friend named Sarah. She and I had lost touch after graduation, but I knew that she'd struggled with her mental health for years. Her condition had apparently worsened, and now she found herself at a particularly low point, with no place to go. Though we hadn't spoken in ages, I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on her. With my 2 children away on a weekend trip with their grandparents, I figured it was the perfect time to offer Sarah a safe haven and the support she desperately needed. When Sarah arrived, we spent hours catching up on our lives and sharing stories from the past. I listened with empathy as she recounted her struggles with mental illness, the battles she'd fought, and the losses she'd suffered. The first day went surprisingly well, and I felt optimistic that my kindness and understanding could make a difference for her. But on the second night, something inside Sarah snapped. As if possessed by an uncontrollable rage, she launched a brutal attack on me. She bit my leg so hard that it drew blood and attempted to stab me with a pair of scissors. In sheer terror, I managed to escape, running to my neighbor's house at 3 a.m. for help, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. In the chaos, Sarah had broken my screen door, leaving it hanging off its hinges. The police arrived swiftly and found Sarah, naked and unashamed, in my living room. She was recording videos of herself, hurling threats and expressing hope that I would burn to death. They arrested her, and as I stood in shock, I considered the possibility of asking the prosecutor to focus on mental health treatment rather than pressing criminal charges against her. After all, Sarah was clearly in need of help. One of Sarah's friends, a man named Dan, had been urging me to drop the charges from the very beginning. He insisted that a felony conviction would ruin her life, and that her mental health issues warranted a more compassionate response. I was on the fence about his request until I received a screenshot from another friend that made my blood run cold. While I was at my neighbor's house seeking refuge from her attack, Sarah had posted on social media accusing me of being the aggressor. Worse still, she'd shared a Google Maps link to my address. I was horrified by the thought of the danger my children could have faced if they'd been home. The betrayal felt like a knife through my heart. I confronted Dan, telling him that not only would I pursue the initial charges, but I would also request additional ones based on Sarah's dangerous actions. His response was nothing short of infuriating. Dan nonchalantly replied with a screenshot of my Google searched address, arguing that anyone could find it and that Sarah didn't deserve a felony on her record. It was at that moment that I realized the full extent of the betrayal. Both Sarah and Dan had taken advantage of my kindness, and I could not let that go unpunished. I vowed to ensure that Sarah faced the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about protecting my children and my community from any further harm. As I prepared for the legal battle that lay ahead, I found strength in the support of my friends and family. Their encouragement reminded me that I was not alone and that I had every right to fight for justice. The court proceedings were intense, and I remained steadfast in my pursuit of a fair outcome that would both hold Sarah accountable and ensure that she received the help she needed. During the trial, I discovered that Sarah had a history of violence towards others, fueled by her untreated mental health issues. The revelation only reinforced my determination to see justice served. After an arduous legal process, the court finally reached a verdict. Sarah would be sentenced to a combination of incarceration and court-ordered mental health treatment. This decision, though difficult, seemed to strike the right balance between justice and compassion. As for Dan, I severed all ties with him. I could no longer trust someone who had shown such blatant disregard for the safety and well-being of my family. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about the delicate balance between empathy and self-preservation. Sometimes, in order to protect the ones we love, we must find the courage to make difficult decisions, even when they go against our natural instincts. The impact of this ordeal on my life was profound. My faith in humanity was shaken but not shattered. I realized that while there were people who would take advantage of kindness, there were also countless others who would stand by my side in times of need. My community rallied around me, offering support and understanding that helped me to heal. Months later, an unexpected twist of fate brought a dramatic end to this saga. Sarah, while receiving treatment in a secure facility, managed to make contact with me. In a heartfelt letter, she apologized for the pain and suffering she had caused, expressing deep remorse for her actions. She acknowledged the severity of her mental health struggles and thanked me for helping her confront them, even though it meant facing the consequences of her actions. As I read her words, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't experienced before. Sarah's apology couldn't erase the trauma of what had happened, but it reminded me that people could change, and that the power of compassion should never be underestimated. I didn't know what the future held for Sarah, but I hoped that she would find a path to healing and redemption. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.